The space competition India hopes to win this week by landing first on the moon's south pole is not just about science and status, but about money as well. India is opening its space sector to foreign investment to increase its share to fivefold in the global space launch market. India and the world are eagerly awaiting Chandrayaan-3's landing on the moon later today. That's days after Russia's lunar 25 crashed while landing on the moon. But one big factor that can make or break the race is money. Space is booming as business, and the moon's south pole water ice may support a lunar colony, many operations and Mars missions. Under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, India wants to increase its launch market share in the next decade by privatizing and opening the sector to international investment. The success of Chandrayaan-3 will help give a flip to the space industry in India, with analysts and business executives expecting the South Asian space sector to grow immediately. So far, India has been able to capitalize on its reputation for cost-competitive engineering. The ISRO had a budget of around just $74 million for the mission. In comparison, estimates put NASA's Artemis moon mission cost at about $93 billion through 2025. While the future looks bright for ISRO and the larger Indian space industry, it's not the case with sanctions hit Russia. With the Luna 25 mission failing, analysts feel future moon missions are unlikely to get any major funding. The economic sanctions and the rising cost of Ukraine war do not help Russia's space industry either. Now we're being joined by our senior correspondent Siddharth MP, who is joining us from ISRO Telemetry Tracking and Command Network Center in Bengaluru. This is where all the communication with Chandrayaan is taking place from. Siddharth, thank you so much for joining us. Now, to begin with, Siddharth, as I mentioned, now this is not just about, of course, space exploration, which of course remains a top priority. It's also about money. What can you tell us about the significance of this mission?
Yeah, as you rightly pointed out, it's not just about exploration, it's also about prestige, and in the longer round, it's about space economy, because let's remember the fact that as long as India's space program is concerned, India is among the only players in all of Asia to have a completely end-to-end space program. Of course, China and Japan have too. China is much ahead. Japan also has a very sophisticated space program. But in terms of end-to-end capability and in terms of catering to the international launch market, India stands out, like you rightly pointed out. This is given the fact that owing to low-cost rockets such as the PSLV, SSLV and GSLV, India has been launching foreign satellites. Over the years, over the last few decades, India has launched more than 430 satellites for foreign customers, and this has brought in millions of revenue to the Indian Space Agency and its respective commercial arm. Let's remember the fact that the more you do lunar missions, the more you do upcoming astronaut missions like Gaganyaan, what happens is your reliability as an agency goes up many-fold in the international launch market, and it is that phase that attracts customers, because what a customer wants is a reliable launch. In space, all they want is reliability. Nobody looks for friendship or anything. It's just purely business-like. So if a customer today comes to India and approaches saying they want to launch their rocket, they're approaching India because they have faith in ISRO's technology, they have faith in ISRO's rocket, and they believe that this mission can be accomplished successfully. So that's the economy aspect. Even in addition to that, let's remember, as far as private industry is concerned, ISRO's missions today, almost if ISRO spends 100 crores on a mission, at least 90% of that amount is funneled into Indian industry, because a large part of the operations carried out by ISRO today, especially the building of rockets, the building of spacecraft, and sourcing components, a lot of it is done from Indian industry. So there are huge consortiums that India has built up over the years, both government run and private run. All of them sort of provide. So some of the rocket engines that the LVM-3 rocket uses, some of the other engines that are used in this mission are all built by private industry. So this is the kind of push that the Indian government has been doing since 2020 to increase the share, increase the wherewithal of the private industry to be able to increase India's share in the global space economy. Right now, India's share is barely about 2%, but India's goal is lofty. Over the years, India wants to take a larger share of the global space economy, which is estimated to be worth 1 trillion by almost 2030.
Right. Well, Siddharth, thank you so much for all the inputs on that and all the figures. But just let's get into the details, of course, of the mission here as well. Frozen water reserves, let's talk about that, in the South Polar region are said to be a game changer. Why is that so?
So far, the first time when man landed on the moon, Neil Armstrong and his team of astronauts, and thereafter the subsequent crew of Apollo mission astronauts, when they landed near the moon's equator. So there they found that the moon is completely dry. In the initial years, based on the technology they had at that time, they concluded that the moon was completely dry. And after a handful of Apollo missions were executed successfully, America decided it's no longer worth going there, both for political reasons, economic reasons, and for science reasons. So they shelved the Apollo program after Apollo 17. After 1972, astronauts have not gone to the moon. But what changed is from the mid-1990s until 2020, there's been multiple spacecraft of NASA, ISRO, of Japan, and even of Korea that have gone to circle the moon. With each of these missions, discoveries have improved. Water, ice, hydrogen, oxygen, all of these have been found, and there's traces of this and also solid evidence of water ice existing. So water ice, as you rightly pointed out, is a game changer, because if you have water on a planet, there is every means to sustain life artificially on that particular planet. Because, for example, in the International Space Station, how the astronauts generate water, they have a hydrogen fuel cell. After that reaction, you get water, and that's how they drink drinking water. And there's also sophisticated purification systems. But on the moon, if you have water ice, if it is found to be in a certain pure form, you can directly purify that and use that, if at all that is a possibility. Water is also crucial because water has hydrogen, water has oxygen, H2O. When you split that, you get hydrogen and oxygen, which when supercooled can be used as cryogenic rocket fuel. So in the future, when you can produce fuel on the moon, moon can also be a sort of pit stop, that is 4 lakh, almost 3.84 lakh kilometers away from Earth. So you want to go to deep space, you want to go further than the moon. You can make a stop at moon, you can refuel, and then you can head deeper into space. Moon can also be a sort of outpost or a settlement for humanity to look for minerals, to look for energy sources, to look for anything that can make life better on Earth, and to look for scarce resources for which there is already a huge, rush between several countries on planet Earth, our home planet, HAME.
Right. Well, Siddharth, thank you so much for bringing us all these inputs on this. Now, for a deeper analysis of the mission, we're being joined by Dr. Malcolm Davis, who's a senior analyst in defense strategy and capability at Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
It's my pleasure.
Now, sir, just to begin with, what can you tell us of the current phase of the Chandrayaan? How critical would you say this is?
Look, it's a really important mission. Obviously, we saw earlier in the week, the Russian probe, lunar 25, crashed into the moon. So now all eyes are on Chandrayaan-3 for a successful landing tonight at about 10:35 p.m. Canberra time. And I think that once that landing happens, that will be a huge accomplishment for India in particular, because for the first time we will have landed a spacecraft on the south pole of the moon. And your previous report, I think, identified some of the important aspects of landing there, and in particular the role of water ice in the lunar regolith.
Right, so that being said, could you tell us about the tracking support that's being provided for this mission? How is ISRO in touch with multiple stations across the world as well?
Well, certainly, India is monitoring the spacecraft. I believe the Canberra Deep Space Network, just out of Canberra, is also monitoring it. Various different other ground stations around Earth are monitoring it. And obviously, the Indian Space Research Organisation is very much connected into what's happening with the probe. It's also linked into the orbiter for Chandrayaan-2, so that's acting as a relay. So you've got a fairly sophisticated deep space tracking, telemetry and control network put in place to make sure that this probe gets down safely.
And also, sir, what makes the South Pole and areas near the South Pole so attractive for exploration? And what's your assessment? How do you think this can help in further space exploration as well?
Well, as your reporter said, it's all about the water ice. If there is water ice locked up in the lunar regolith, the lunar soil, and that water ice can be extracted, it can be converted into, firstly, oxygen for sustaining a human presence on the moon in moon bases. That then enables the utilization of lunar resources to undertake a space-based economy, to do space manufacturing, to build space-based solar power satellites that can then beam solar energy back to Earth in a limitless supply. But also that water ice can be converted into rocket fuel. And the moon has a very shallow gravity well. So if you can launch spacecraft from the moon, that can exploit that more shallower gravity well to gain added advantage in terms of the cost of getting around the solar system. So really, we need to think about the moon as very much the stepping stone to the rest of the solar system. It opens up the solar system far more effectively and easily than trying to do everything from Earth.
Right. Well, sir, thank you so much for joining us on the show with your insights on this.
Thank you.
Well, we all know that the orbits near the Earth are getting overpopulated with thousands of satellites. But now we've gotten to a point where even the moon's orbit is becoming a hive of activity. As India's Chandrayaan-3 approaches the lunar South Pole for a soft landing and several lunar missions are in the pipeline, our senior correspondent Siddharth MP tells us why there is heightened collision at risk around the moon now. Take a look.
The moon is the Earth's natural satellite and the closest celestial body. It is the only celestial body where astronauts have landed so far. After 1972, Apollo missions came to a halt. But what is causing renewed interest in lunar exploration? NASA's Clementine mission suggested the presence of ice in the moon's shadowed craters. In 2009, India's Chandrayaan-3 detected signs of oxygen and hydrogen molecules on the moon. In the following decade, the NASA Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter offered evidence that water existed in the moon's permanently shadowed regions. The confirmation of lunar water came in 2018 when data from a NASA payload on India's Chandrayaan-3 confirmed water ice on the moon. Soon it was confirmed that water existed even on sunlit regions of the moon. If water is present on the moon, it can be used to derive hydrogen and oxygen for rocket fuel. It could support life and can aid in developing lunar settlements. In the quest for lunar exploration, 7 active crafts circle the moon today. This includes 4 missions from America. India's Chandrayaan-2 orbiter continues to circle the moon, so does the propulsion module from Chandrayaan-3. Korea's KPLO orbiter is also present in orbit. Defunct crafts including India's Chandrayaan-1 and Japan's OUNA are also circling the moon. Despite only a handful of crafts circling the moon, there have been risks of collisions and crafts have had to be maneuvered to safety. According to ISRO, India's Chandrayaan-2 orbiter had to undertake 3 maneuvers in the last 4 years to avoid collision risks with the US and Korean crafts. While there is increasing interest in exploring the moon, all participating nations have to cooperate and coordinate to do so safely.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.